Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about literature and the arts. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Makaya Otini, and today we're speaking with Joe Cantrell. Joe works with objects that are outmoded, cast off, or broken to compose and perform music that raises questions about materialism, planned obsolescence, and mass consumption. His work has been supported by the Bemis Center for Contemporary Art, the San Diego Art Institute, the Soundfjord Sequence Series Residency, and others. We're excited to be with him today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our free newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities. To support the podcast, you can make a one-time donation through our website or purchase a subscription to our blog where you'll find more premium content and resources at thedatekeepers.com. Thank you for being a part of our community.
Joe, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. Can you tell us about yourself and what are you working on now?
Sure. I am a sound artist and a sound practitioner. My work talks about obsolescence and technology. Really, it's focused on objects and how they interact with us as people, with our bodies, but also where they come from, how they decay, how they change over time, and what that means, not only for us directly, one-to-one with the objects, but in sort of larger systems, economically, ecologically, sociopolitically. So part of my practice is performative. I'm a musician. People often describe the type of music I do as noise music, but you can think of it as sort of thinking of music as more than just notes, embracing all types of sound as being included in what we think of as music. So, the shaver is just as valuable as a sound as a piano, for example, right? So a lot of my performative practice focuses on objects that I've collected that make sounds that are electronic, that are either broken, obsolete, were sort of made to be disposable or low quality, or that were sort of found. So I collect these objects. I often put them in feedback and have a dialogue with them. During my performances, you'll hear the sound of, let's say, a broken mixer in feedback, and that can be combined with an altered toy, and all these things sort of talk with each other. We all have sort of a conversation. I like to think of objects as kind of partially human. I think it's a really valuable perspective to consider a partial anthropomorphic attitude when dealing with objects, specifically technological objects.
Did you grow up watching your parents do this or older siblings, or is it just something you stumbled on?
Sure. Music has always been a big part of my life, and I was always very interested in recording, doing electronic music, or just practicing music in general. Our economic circumstance really didn't allow it. I don't know if you ever walked down a neighborhood and seen a house where it's just like, wow, is that an abandoned house? Does someone actually live there? And that was us. We lived in that house. So I really didn't have access to much of anything, right? So I couldn't just go out and buy a guitar. I couldn't go out and buy a keyboard. But the things that I did have access to were things that were thrown away, things that I could find at a thrift store or that, were at a garage sale, right? Which were often sort of broken or not quite functional. And I would make do with those. And I found out sort of how to work with electronics, how audio works, how to reroute stuff using those basic tools. And later on, I went to school and studied electronic music and programming and stuff, and really focused my practice into making work and making sound and performance using the computer as a tool. After a while, though, I felt like that sort of led to a dead end. I mean, so much of our time is spent looking at screens, and it just really felt like a stretch to spend 6, 8 hours a day working in the screen and then suddenly have to flip a switch and be like, okay, well, let's be creative in this same environment. I was sort of burnt out on this. So it made me turn back and think about those objects that I used previously, right? What value is there in looking at those things that I used to use? That led me to my current practice, which embraces my past, my personal past.
I love that.
Yeah. And it also takes me to places where I wouldn't necessarily go. It
Yeah.
reduces my own agency in the process and my own intentionality in sort of authoring programs and music software. A lot of the stuff starts as a blank slate and you sort of have to create your entire universe of sound. But when you're dealing with found sound, found objects, you really have to approach these things on their own terms, right? A broken siren can only do so much. There are certain things that it can't do. And so you sort of have to cooperate with it, right? So I started really feeling these objects as being collaborators that I had to negotiate with and not always just tell them what to do. And for me, that was a really rich place to create.
Yeah, and if nothing else, it's good practice for when you're dealing with people. If we can learn not to expect the broken siren to do things that it is constitutionally incapable of doing, maybe we can learn also to have more realistic expectations of the people around us and to engage with them in a way that is likely to lead to a more harmonious relationship because we're not expecting them to do or be something that they're not.
And then if you choose to interact with that person, well, that's your choice, right?
Right.
And I really like the other direction as well. The sort of thinking about objects as being partially human is valuable to me. I like this analogy of, I don't know if you ever, as a kid, in like first grade or preschool or whatever, you'll make well, they used to make ashtrays, but now make a clay mug or something and you go and fire it and you take it home to your mom and dad. And that clay mug, they're going to treasure more than any mug in the cabinet, but it's probably like functionally the worst mug in the house, right? No one would ever like want to drink it. You wouldn't give a guess, but like, here, take this crappy mug that my kid made, right? But the thing that gives it value is the traces of the action, the traces of the contact with another person, right? The fingerprints, the way that it's made. I look at objects and technological objects in that way as well. So, the broken mixer that I use, it's not just a thing, it has a history. Like, for example, I have a mixer that a friend of mine left at my house and then went on a trip to Ghana. And he's like, I'll be back for that mixer. And he never came back. But every
Strange thing to abandon.
It's a small, crappy mixer. But I think about him. I'm like, hey, how you doing, Dave? So there's a little part of that person in that mixer, right?
There's a whole story there. Like, maybe he went to Ghana specifically to get away from that mixer in his
That'd be
relationship
weird.
with it was just really dysfunctional. Like, my mind goes just in weird places.
Like,
Well,
it's cursed.
Yeah, you're reminding me of myself when I was a kid. Both of us didn't go to Makaya was homeschooled, and mine is a different story, but I didn't go to school until I was a teenager. But I made musical instruments as a kid. And I remember my first guitar that I made was not working. And I was so frustrated with it. And I remembered that I stole sugar and I ate it and I got hyper. And I thought, if I get a lot of sugar and slather it, it'll be louder and good. Nothing worked. And I made a bad smelling drum with a...
Why did the drum smell bad, though?
Because I used the sheep skin and I didn't dry it properly. That's how we made drums back in Morocco. But I was a kid and dumb. Like, I didn't understand what I was doing. But I made my drum and I hid it in the shadow. You have to put it in the sun to dry and you have to clean it in a certain way. I didn't do any of that. And it smelled really bad, but I still treasured it. I thought that was fun.
Yeah.
But I didn't end up becoming a musician. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, music is something that we as humans do, right?
Yes.
It is a symptom of humanity. Part of this sort of widened definition of sound and of sound practice is also an invitation. A lot of people can do this, and I think it's great, and it can be expanded to other things, which I think is really an important notion. One of the things that I was struck with after deciding to go back to school and pursue an arts degree and in my master's, I spent a lot of time and money doing a master's project, and it involved a lot of technology, and it worked. But at the end of that process, I didn't like it. I was like, okay, well, it was an experiment, and sure, it did the thing that I sort of wanted it to do, but like, meh. And then I thought about how much money and resources I just used up, the stuff that goes into making the specialized speakers that I was using, the water and the ecological toll and the human toll and, putting this together in the factory labor. And I'm just like, yeah, man, is this worth it? Is this worth my self-expression? And that answer was kind of like, at least for that project, was like, no. So part of this practice is also a response to that. It's like, well, what is the response as an artist to this situation? You can either say, well, I'm just going to stop making stuff because, how is this worth someone risking their fingers in a factory in making the things that I'm using? Or you could say, well, I'm just going to disregard it. I can't do anything about it. Therefore, it doesn't exist and I'm not a part of it. And neither one of those answers really was good enough. So this idea of anthropomorphizing objects is in a way a response to that problem, that situation. Finding that middle ground of thinking about objects in the way that maybe your drum that you cherished or that clay mug, you can see the humanity that's embedded in it. And it makes it harder to just throw something away. And maybe that impulse gets us a little closer to that middle ground. It gets us a little further away from just contributing to this cycle of obsolescence and consumption.
Now, what about people who, I guess, err in the opposite direction and are compelled to hoard everything instead of serially consuming and throwing things away, but actually have difficulty with letting go of things? Is there a way of incorporating that anthropomorphic lens into addressing that issue?
It's interesting because the philosophical framework that aligned for me is called New Materialism. There are three big authors in that: Karen Barad, Jane Bennett, and Rosie Braidotti. And Jane Bennett actually writes about hoarding and this relationship. She sees hoarders, if I remember correctly, and I might be misquoting, sorry, Jane, if I'm misquoting you, that sense of anthropomorphic connection is kind of turned up to 10, right? And it becomes overpowering to them. And that's part of the reason why they can't let go of these things, is because they become companions. Everything becomes precious. So I guess you could say that, there's limits to everything. For the record, I'm not encouraging anybody to become hoarders, but Slavoj Žižek once remarked that we need to realign our understanding of waste products and not treat them as things that are problematic, but really embrace them. As much as we embrace our new iPhone or our new TV or our new car, we also have to embrace all of the garbage that process puts out.
Because it was once a new thing before it became garbage.
Absolutely. Everything we have now is future trash.
Exactly.
Well, and I wonder if you've thought about the parallel between American culture's obsession with youth and fetishization of the virtues of youth at the expense of the virtues of age, and how that reflects our attitude toward material things. Because I don't know why, but I've always found our culture's attitude toward youth and age to be very counterintuitive. I have always felt like the older you get, I mean, some old people don't learn and just get dumber as they go. But when a person spends their life paying attention, they amass a certain degree of palpable wisdom that others can then benefit from. Like there's a gravitas to it that you acquire if you age attentively. And it just seems like that is not widely appreciated in our culture. And I've never quite understood why. Because, I'm not that old. I don't remember a time when I was like, I'm young and therefore youth is the be all end all. I was always kind of hoping to get wiser instead of just hoping to stay young. And I wonder if you think there's a relationship between those two attitudes, because I don't think I'd really thought about that parallel until just now, but now you've got me thinking about it.
That's interesting. It makes me think of a lot of things. Number one is this quote by the comedian Dick Gregory. He said, they say that when you're older, you become wiser. It's just like, that's not true. If you're stupid when you're young, you'll be stupid when you're old.
That's kind of true.
But I don't necessarily believe that. I think that the thing that you're speaking to is the differences in types of knowledge. One thing about technology and about objects is that they're static and they can be built upon. I don't have to reinvent the pencil. That knowledge is already there and it persists from generation to generation as long as we have the plans and the facilities and the resources, right? One's personal understanding and what we would call wisdom, that is really difficult to impart. Your parents would tell you, like, don't do this. Believe me, do not go out and party with your friends for a week. You're going to regret it, right? And how many kids were like, oh, you know what? That's probably good advice. They have experienced that. No, 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 no. They're like, nah, you don't know anything. I'm going to do it, right?
Yeah.
So that type of knowledge comes through personal experience, and it's really hard to pass on generationally. But I think that, there's so much to this. This is a really good question. There might be some interesting information here in looking at the history of the teenager and how that has changed specifically in the 20th century. Our construction of what a teenager is emerged after World War II in the mid to late 20th century. Prior to that, teenagers were kind of expected to be closer to the family, to take the family business or, whatever you did. If your father was a tailor, you were a tailor and you had the name Taylor and you helped the family survive, right? After World War II, at least in the West, there was more disposable income. Teenagers had more free will and independence, and this notion of an independent teenager, not only as an entity, but as a market emerged.
Mhm.
So I think that there is potentially that connection with economy, with capitalism, with marketing that focuses on the young as a constantly renewing market. So it would benefit industry to keep on top of that, right? And I'm speculating here. I don't have the receipts for any of this, but
Well, I think you're onto something because it seems to me that one of the qualities that young people might have that might be a little bit more scarce in older people and that would be highly valued by marketers is the inability to differentiate between something that you actually need and something that just you want it. And again, there's plenty of old people who never grow out of that. But it seems to me that there's an incentive for the marketer to ensure that fewer old people grow out of that and more of us stay young longer so that we don't develop that impulse control and that differentiation.
yeah, that's also an interesting tack, presuming that teenagers would be a market that has disposable income, but doesn't have fully formed frontal cortexes. That is a prime area for exploitation by someone who wants to make a lot of money. So I think there is something there.
And can you tell us about a project you're working on now?
Oh boy, I have a couple of projects. One is using a mixer that was sort of given to me. It was broken. It was a digital mixer, and I had to replace it as part of one of my jobs. Like, okay, well, this mixer is broken. Once a couple of faders aren't working, and it's 15 years old. It's on its way out. I'm going to replace it with a new digital mixer. Okay. So I have this old, sort of broken digital mixer. And one of the nice things about digital mixers is that they can be automated. In other words, you can connect it to a computer via a protocol called MIDI, which is super old, it was invented in the 80s. And you can control the faders and you can control the routing and do that automatically. So I've been working with this mixer on a process called no input mixing, which was invented by, I can't remember his name, an artist in the late 90s. And basically, it's a creative use of audio feedback. So if you've ever spoken with a microphone in front of a speaker and that mic gets too close to the speaker, you can hear that whoop, all that feedback, right? Well, what would happen if instead of just using the microphone, you directly connect the output of the mixer into the input of the mixer? So you have this direct feedback channel. And that is how no input mixing proceeds. So you start thinking about the mixer itself as an instrument and how you can change things like volume and EQ to create different soundscapes. So I'm using this mixer now, and controlling it with a computer so that I can make rhythmic patterns. Basically, it's as if I had, 10 or 15 different hands and fingers, and I can do all these really neat, intricate things with the mixer. I just started doing that, and I'm really excited about it. Another project that I am working on is a version of the Village People song Macho Man, but it is played at like 20 beats per minute. So it's played at like 1/10 of the speed of the original song. So it takes about half an hour to get through. And it becomes this epic, insane journey, and it turns into a completely different experience. It's a little hard to describe. Parts of it get really noisy. Parts of it are really sort of beatific. So the chorus becomes almost like this kind of Badalamenti, Twin Peaksy texture. And that is combined with video as well. It's really interesting what happens to music when you take a single aspect of it and turn it to a place where you absolutely is beyond where it would be expected. In this case, like extremely slow. It becomes something very different than it originally was. So yeah, those are the two projects that I'm currently working on.
And how about something similar to my stinky drum? Did you make a bad instrument? And if so, where is it and what was it?
Well, your stinky drum, I'm very curious about this now. Like, how smelly are your drums is a question I'm going to start asking people.
You don't want to go near that one. And thankfully, it
Wow.
does not exist anymore. No, it was not fun.
Well, I had a project that I was working on at Bemis Center. I did a residency there in 2022. I was working on a project called Letters from the Earth, which is still sort of ongoing. And the idea of the project was thinking about permanence and time. A lot of our interactions, like when we text somebody, you receive that text, it goes away instantly, right? All of our communications are really ephemeral. They just sort of like dissolve as soon as they're sent, as opposed to when people wrote letters in the 1800s, right? We can see people's interactions because of these things, these records that they leave behind. So I was sort of meditating on a way of getting that sort of permanence, but with digital objects. And where I landed was thinking about digital waste that was thrown away, because most e-waste is not recycled. It just ends up in landfill. So the idea was to go to a landfill or go to some waste site and find e-waste, remove the electronics and separate out the plastic, and take those plastic parts and then melt them down into cubes, glue those cubes together so that they basically form pixels. And those pixels can form words. And those words can be buried back into the ground. And
Oh,
because they're
wow.
plastic, they'll last for like 500 years, right? So taking this waste product and turning it into a means of communication. So that project involved me going into, they have this thing, they call it the thrift store. It's really an attic of junk, which I love. Oh my God, I love attics full of junk. So I took apart all of these things, old scanners, old projectors, and just, broke it all apart. And then melting that stuff was a challenge because it's not, it's toxic, Shocker, melting plastic is not the healthiest thing to do.
Yeah.
So I did a bunch of sort of studies for that, which turned out really neat, but they weren't as efficient as I wanted to do. And I was able to connect with a college there that I can't remember the name of in Omaha that has wonderful Fab Lab. And they have these machines by a company. It's like an independent company called like Perfect Plastic or something like that. They basically sell these bespoke machines that can grind up plastic and then extrude it into materials. I'm like, that's perfect. So I brought all my plastic stuff and I'm like, yay, I'm breaking it up and I'm grinding it in this machine. And as I'm using it, I'm realizing that these machines are handmade and they are not robust. And so by the end of this process, I'm like, I think this grinder is not doing too well. And I started the extrusion process, and I didn't realize that apparently one of the heaters in the machine was faulty. So what it was doing was melting all the plastic and
Oh my God.
just sinking it into all the components of the machine. So I
Oh, no.
completely ruined their device. And I felt so bad. I went to the shop manager. I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. And he's like, you know what? No one's ever used it before. Whatever, I don't care. He just totally didn't care. I'm like, okay. But I was able to get a version of that project out of it, which I still haven't buried. I have to find a home for that. But that's
Was the version of the project that you got out of it the grinder with all of the bits of plastic stuck still inside of it?
if only I could just take that and exhibit it. That would be
Dig it,
great.
bury it.
Yeah, right. I'm sure he would have
Give it last
probably
rites.
yeah, he would have been okay with that. I'm like, take this thing and bury it. Um, yeah, but it was the grinder. There was two versions of it. The melty version, which are really neat. You can see all the little components in the folds of the plastic. It's almost like if you took an ice cube and just, it's almost like working with resin or something where you put all the stuff in it and you can kind of see the stuff that gets embedded in it. But the ground up stuff is less indicative of where it came from. Although a lot of the things that I was using were aromatherapy machines, like a lot of them. There was like hundreds of aromatherapy machines that I ground up. And boy, that project smelled like every single incense played at the same time. It was pretty stinky. So that was a stinky project.
Well, see, it's good to have stinky projects because you remember them. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed having you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been fun.
Have a great night. It was great talking to you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.